Nearly half of Gen Z has a diagnosed mental health condition. And I'm not talking about being stressed or struggling a little. I'm talking about actually diagnosed. That number has never existed before. Not for millennials, not for Gen X, not for any generation that has ever lived on this planet. Which raises one very obvious question. What on earth happened to these people? And here's the thing. It wasn't soft parenting. It wasn't too many participation trophies. It wasn't any of the things older generations like to point at. What happened to Gen Z was actually something nobody had ever seen coming, because nothing like it had ever existed before. It was a phone, a smartphone, with a front-facing camera, Instagram, TikTok, and about 5 hours of social media a day, before the age of 16. Now, there's a social psychologist at NYU called Jonathan Haidt, and he spent years just tracking what was happening to Gen Z's mental health. And what he found was basically a cliff, like one specific moment in history where the mental health of an entire generation just fell off a ledge and never came back up. And that moment was 2012. See, between 2010 and 2015, the flip phone died and the smartphone took over. And what that meant was that almost every single teenager on the planet went through puberty, which is the most sensitive period of brain development that exists, while staring into a screen for most of the day. Haidt called this the Great Rewiring, and the numbers that came after it were genuinely shocking. Anxiety in young people went up by 134%. Depression went up by 106%. And Gen Z, the ones who hit puberty right in the middle of all this, got hit the hardest, 139% increase, in less than 10 years. And for girls specifically, it was even more extreme. The rate of self-harm among girls aged 10 to 14 more than quintupled between 2010 and 2015. Not doubled, quintupled. So why did this happen? Why did a phone do this? Because the brain at puberty is not a finished product. It's actively being built. And the connections being formed during those years are the exact ones that will determine how you handle stress, how you manage your emotions, how you build your identity, and how you deal with other people for the rest of your life. For about 200 million years of evolution, that building process happened through play, through real-world interaction with other humans, through boredom, through failure, through getting back up and trying again. Gen Z was the first generation to replace almost all of that with a screen. And not by choice. The phones just arrived, the apps arrived, the algorithms arrived. And suddenly, growing up was happening in a bedroom, alone, being watched and judged by hundreds of people in real time every single day. Haidt described it like this. Gen Z brains grew around their phones the way a tree grows around a fence post. The fence post was never supposed to be there, but the tree had to grow anyway. And now you can't separate the two. And then, just to make things worse, they grew up and walked straight into a pandemic, then a broken economy, then AI started replacing the entry-level jobs they'd spent years training for before they even had a chance to apply. Recent graduates now make up just 7% of new hires, down from 11% in 2022. The career ladder everyone promised them just quietly disappeared. A UNICEF study from 2025 found that 6 in 10 Gen Z young people feel overwhelmed by global news. They consume more news than any generation has ever lived, and they have almost no power to do anything about any of it. So yeah, Gen Z is cooked. But here's what I actually think people get wrong about that. It's not because they're weak, it's because they were handed a phone at age 11, told the planet was dying, watched their job market disappear, and then got asked by the generation that raised them why they seem so anxious all the time. The brain didn't break, it adapted. It just adapted to something it was never designed to handle.